Welcome back to the channel. I apologize again. I apologized over on my other channel because I didn't get this out on time. 4th of July weekend, it's pretty big here in the United States, and I realized that the 4th of July was not on a weekend. It was on Tuesday, but pretty much when the 4th of July happens around a weekend, and that's pretty flexible a lot of the time, then a lot of the 4th of July stuff runs over into the weekend or starts in the weekend and runs into the rest of the week. So, yeah, just threw me off, and I apologize. We'll get back into it. So, today we're going to be talking about Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. Interestingly enough, Minnesota has this this nickname, Land of 1,000 Lakes, and in looking up information for this, here it is. It's called Land of 10,000 Lakes, but it's actually 11,842 is the more accurate number. And these are lakes that are over 10 acres in size. I'd have to check on the metric conversion. Let's see. Let's see what that is. Anyway, so Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. As soon as I get an answer over here to pull up, I will let you know what that 10 acres converts to in metric. Anyway, statehood for Minnesota was granted May 11th, 1858, making it the 32nd state to join the United States. The capital is St. Paul, Minnesota. The population 5.7 million, making it the 22nd most populous state. The area for the state is 86,935.83 miles squared, making it roughly 225,163 square kilometers, making it the 12th largest state in the United States. Okay, so 10 acres is roughly equal to 4.047 hectares. So there you go. Largest cities in Minnesota, we have Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Duluth. Those are the four largest cities there in Minnesota. So Minnesota, the French started exploring Minnesota in the 1650s or 1660s. They're not exactly sure when that they actually started. They were the first Europeans to explore the area, and that was in the 17th century sometime. Then French-Canadian settlers started coming into the area, and they were doing fur trade, and they were looking, basically that was the thing, is using those natural resources. So, the United States then purchased a lot of territory from France. We call it the Louisiana Purchase. It's also sometimes called Jefferson's Folly, or at the time it was called Jefferson's Folly. Now it is definitely seen as not a particularly dumb move. At the time, it was not seen as as a particularly smart move to buy all that territory. Anyway, so they started out, it became part of the Northwest Territory in 1849. Then it was designated as the Minnesota Territory, and then, of course, statehood in 1858. Logging became one of the largest industries in the state at that point in time. There was a lot of logging. There's a lot of natural resources up there in Minnesota, so a lot of forests and trees and that kind of thing. And so there was a lumber boom at that point in time. There was also the Dakota War of 1862 that happened in this kind of period in time. The Dakota Sioux and the European settlers were coming into conflict at this point in time, and there was an execution of 38 Dakota men, and it was the largest mass execution in the United States history. So, not really good. There was a large, at this point in time as well, late 19th, early 20th century, there was a large Scandinavian immigration to the Minnesota area. And so we have a lot of people from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland that emigrated to the area. And there are quite a few towns in Minnesota even today that have strong ties to Scandinavia and Scandinavian heritage. So there you go. I usually put something in about the present day, which I apparently left out this time. Anyway, so the growth has still centered in a lot of respects around the natural resources in Minnesota, but it has diversified into education, healthcare, and agriculture, and we'll talk about those later. So a lot of outdoor recreation, again, we'll talk about that later as well. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of Minnesota history. Minnesota really didn't get involved in the Civil War. It was a little bit too far north in a lot of respects, and at the time it wasn't a state, so it had less impact on that particular era of American history. So again, I mentioned that it's the land of 10,000 lakes, so there's a lot of water in Minnesota. So a lot of forests. The northern portion of the state, forests, hills, some mountains, not particularly large mountains, but there are some mountainous features. It's not really known as a mountainous state, but it has some of those features as well. Forests, prairie and farmland, that tends to be down towards the southern part of the state. The climate is subarctic and humid continental. It's a mix between those two. The winters in Minnesota, they tend to be cold and snowy. Average temperatures range from 0 to 20 degrees to the low 20s in Fahrenheit, which is negative 18 Celsius to negative 5 degrees Celsius. And that's in the southern part of the state. So it can get a lot colder up in the northern region. 30 to 70 inches of snow per year, which is 76 to 178 centimeters. The springs tend to be short. The transition from the winter to the summer, there's not a lot of time in there for it to have a summer, and so it ends up the spring is because it's in that northern climate, and we've got the subarctic, it ends up the winter is a little bit longer in that part of the world. Spring, 40s to 60s, which is 4 to 9 degrees Celsius up to 15 to 21 degrees Celsius. And because of the nature of the spring, the weather tends to be a bit chaotic. You can get snow even in the spring, which is actually not unheard of in quite a number of states. Summers, warm and humid, which is awful combination right there. Average temperatures is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 21 to 26 degrees Celsius, up to 80s, which is somewhat low for summer in my life experience, but not necessarily low for Minnesota. So in the 80s is 27 to 29 degrees Celsius. So again, southern part of the state. They can get tornadoes in Minnesota. Not very common. The tornadoes are mostly in the southern part of the United States, so it's just that they can get them. So don't go to Minnesota never expecting to have a tornado, and you might get some. Autumn's lots of trees, so people go up to Minnesota and things. It's in the United States, there are places where people go to view the fall foliage when the trees change color. Minnesota is one of those places. Also up in the New England area in the United States, that's something that they do. So the temperatures drop 60s to the 40s. So 15 to 21 degrees Celsius to 4 to 9 degrees Celsius. So it's in September, it's up in the 60s, and it gets lower and lower as it goes. So generally drier than spring and summer at that point. But anyway, there you go. Geography and the climate there. So industry, I mentioned this a little bit before. So Minnesota has been diversifying diversifying their industry, which seems a bit odd wording there. They've been diversifying what brings in income in the state. So originally, it was there was a lot of concentration around the natural resources of the state. So fur trading and trapping. Then we had the logging boom, and now we still have those industry, maybe not the fur trapping part of it, but we still have the logging industry is influential in Minnesota because they do have that particular natural interest. But you also have manufacturing, healthcare, medical technology, agriculture, finance and insurance, retail and consumer goods, education and research, renewable energy and clean technology, and tourism and recreation. Now, one of the things that I have noticed about doing these little talks on the states is that is just how much tourism and recreation constitutes the industry of the states. Even if a state is not particularly well known for recreation and tourism, a lot of their economy is still centered around recreation and tourism, which I thought was rather interesting. I mean, I can understand California and New York having Florida, Hawaii, Alaska, some of those areas, they draw a lot of tourists. And Alaska may be a bit strange for me to say that it draws a lot of tourists, but I know that they do cruises up to Alaska. They do hunting and fishing expeditions. I know, one of my neighbors is a pilot, and during the year he lives down here, and for the summer though, he and his family go up to Alaska, and he flies bear tours. So he flies people out to, I shouldn't just say bear tours. He also flies people out to, do whatever. So they may go out fishing and he'll fly them to a remote area, or hunting. He'll fly them to a remote area, drop them off, and come back in a week and pick them up and take them back. So that's, and he makes a lot of money doing that. So the fact that for me, and for many people that you would talk to, they wouldn't think, oh yeah, I really got to go to Minnesota to check out the tourist opportunities in Minnesota. Minnesota still has quite a few tourist opportunities there. So we'll get into that. But I just want to talk a bit about the manufacturing. So we have 3M. 3M is huge, a huge company. Medtronic, Polaris Inc., Cargill, Toro, Arctic Cat. These are all some of the major manufacturers in Minnesota. Medtronic is a manufacturer, but they also do healthcare technology. So we also have Abbott Laboratory, Boston Scientific, United Health Group, Mayo Clinic. Moving on to the agriculture, I mentioned Cargill. They also do agricultural food production and processing. So they're part manufacturing, part agriculture. We have CHS Inc., Land O'Lakes. They're a dairy, and dairy products is mostly what I remember them for. Land O'Lakes butter. That's what I think of when I think of Land O'Lakes. Hormel Foods, Crystal Valley Cooperative. Moving on to the finance and insurance, we have the United Health Group, U.S. Bank Corp, Ameriprise Financial. In the retail and consumer goods, Target Corporation, Best Buy, Polaris Inc., Christopher and Banks Corporation, Gander Outdoors, Northern Tool and Equipment. In the education research, University of Minnesota, Mayo Clinic, we talked about them before. The McKnight Foundation, some of those large ones are there in education research. When we move on to renewable energy, we have Xcel Energy, Mortenson. They're a construction and engineering firm apparently that does renewable energy. I'd never heard of them. Ecolab, H.B. Fuller, Anderson Corporation. So those are some of the the major businesses and the areas that they do business in. Now, at this point, we're going to move on to the tourism and recreation area. Outdoor recreation is one of the big things. I've mentioned multiple times the natural resources and things that are part of Minnesota itself. And so that is a huge draw, bringing a lot of money to the state, and a lot of reasons why people go to the state is for the outdoor recreation opportunities. So they've got the over 11,000 lakes, and that's, again, they call themselves the land of 10,000 lakes, but those are just lakes that are 10 acres in size or larger. So there's got to be a lot of lakes that are smaller than that 10 acres that just didn't make the cut. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of those that are still there. There's a lot of those opportunities. So we have fishing, boating, kayaking, canoeing, hiking, biking, camping, Itasca State Park, Voyageurs National Park. In addition to that, because of their climate, they do have a lot of winter activities as well. So there's snowboarding, skiing, snowshoeing, ice fishing, all of those things. In addition to that, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. I don't know why it's called that, but anyway, there's wilderness areas in the state, and they are connected by rivers and streams and stuff, and you can canoe and whatever else between the different lakes and things. And so you have this Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. So yeah. Mall of America is located there in Bloomington. It's one of the largest shopping malls in the United States. And it's not just like stores. They also have like attractions there. There's an indoor amusement park, and apparently it's called Nickelodeon Universe. Yeah. Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're called the Twin Cities. They're a pretty big attraction as far as the Art and Science Museum. Let's see. Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Science Museum of Minnesota. There's the Guthrie Theater, the Orpheum Theater, and they're a pretty big draw as far as that goes. You have cultural and historic sites. I skipped the Minnesota State Fair for some reason, but it's it's interesting that the Minnesota State Fair, all states have a state fair, but Minnesota State Fair is actually pretty famous outside of the state. Yeah, every state has a state fair. Who cares? I mention it because actually people outside of Minnesota know about the Minnesota State Fair, which is, who cares about your, it's one of those things. It's a state fair. But, yeah. Then we have the cultural historic sites, the Minnesota History Center, Mill City Museum, Fort Snelling, and the Guthrie Theater and the orchestra. Those are all sites there. I also put on here, it's, what's it called? I put a picture here. This is a tourist draw for the state. It is Spoon Bridge and Cherry. There it is. It's a sculpture. It's called Spoon Bridge and Cherry. Yeah. If you want to go see this one, it is in the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yeah. So there you go. Then we go back to the wildlife and bird watching. So again, we come back to the fact that the state has an abundance of natural resources. So there is a large draw for people going to the state to experience the wildlife and the bird watching. So the Zax Zim Bog is a famous birding destination, and you also have the National Eagle Center in Wabasha. So, yeah. Moving on to trivia, we have the Juicy Lucy. Now, the Juicy Lucy sometimes spelled with an I, but it's a burger it's a cheeseburger. And what they do is they stuff the cheese into the hamburger patty instead of just putting the cheese on top of the burger. Yeah. I actually have had something similar to this. Very good. Never had the Juicy Lucy, though. Largest ball of twine. It's in Darwin. It weighs over 17,000 pounds. Let's see. And 17,000 in kilograms. What is 17,000 in kilograms? Oops. Nope. I accidentally typed in 17,000 in kilograms, and it told me it was 17 metric tons. It's approximately 7,711 kilograms, so 17,000 pounds. We have the Skyways. Apparently in Minneapolis, they have a lot of Skyways. There has the largest interconnected system of Skyways in the world. They have their climate-controlled pedestrian bridges to walk between the buildings of the downtown area during the winter. Austin, Minnesota is where Spam was invented, and they have a Spam museum there. Spam was created by the Hormel Company, which is there in Minnesota. So there's the largest freestanding hockey stick in Eveleth, Minnesota. It's 110 feet tall. I really should do this beforehand. I don't think of these things until I'm talking about it, because I have the information, but I just didn't convert it to metric. So 110 feet is 33.53 meters. So we have the town of Ely, Minnesota, says it is the mosquito capital of the world, but they refer to the main street of the city as a mosquito-free zone. Apparently, they have so many mosquito-repelling measures on Main Street that they determined that it's a mosquito-free zone. International Falls in Minnesota is called the icebox of the nation. It is extremely cold there, and so they have just kind of rolled with that name. They're like, fine, it's so cold here, we're the icebox. And then you have the Wabasha Street Caves. Let's see, where did I put that? There we go. So in St. Paul, Minnesota, they have the Wabasha Street Caves. They're sandstone caves that were used during Prohibition for speakeasies and other illegal activities. And you can go get tours of these caves. And they host events in them too. Apparently swing dances and murder mystery dinners are some of the things that they do there. Moving on, let's see. Duck decoys. You cannot put a duck decoy in a barbershop. It's illegal to hang the duck in the barbershop because it's suspicious. Makes no sense to me. Whale fishing is illegal in Minnesota as well. Where you would find a whale in Minnesota to be able to hunt it, or fish it. When I was doing the search, it calls it whale fishing, but whales are not fish, so you can't fish for a whale. So, yeah, you cannot hunt whales in Minnesota. I don't know why there's more than one state where there's not a whale in sight, and they have laws against hunting whales in those states. I would not be surprised if there was a law in my state that says you cannot hunt whales here. And there's no possible way a whale would be anywhere near my state. Same with Minnesota. I have no idea why, but apparently on the books you cannot hunt whales in Minnesota. Who knew? In Mankato, I think that's how you pronounce it. It is against the law to have dirty pigs in the street. They don't actually determine what the criteria for that is. Apparently, if there's too much mud on, I don't know. You cannot cross the state lines with a duck on your head. I don't know. I don't know if it was an epidemic at some point. There was just too many people crossing the state lines with ducks on their heads. I don't know. Seriously, where do they come up with these things? So, let's see. The largest gathering of zombies every year in October in Minneapolis. They have the zombie pub crawl, and they hold the Guinness World Record of the largest gathering of zombies. Yeah. Rollerblades were invented in Minnesota by Scott Olson and Brennan Olson, and that's an example of that Scandinavian heritage. Scott and Brennan Olson. First commercially successful inline skates back in the 1980s. The largest gingerbread house is in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and it was constructed in 2006, and it measures 67.39 feet long by 35.8 feet wide by 21.16 feet tall. And cheerleading apparently comes from Minnesota. So thank you, Minnesota, for cheerleaders. The University of Minnesota. There was cheerleading before, but it was not organized. It was like, somebody in the stands kind of thing. Or, hey, cheer! They created that organization and created the cheerleading and all that stuff that come out of it back in 1898. Apparently, the first organized cheerleading squad at the University of Minnesota. So yeah. That's it for Minnesota for now. We may visit Minnesota in the future, talk about some more of their natural resources and whatnot. If you have questions, please like, subscribe, comment down below, put your questions down below, put the bell on so you get notifications when I release videos, and see you later.